The barn was still smoking when the first light broke over the valley. Otto stood in the ash, his entire year's harvest turned to cinder. The orc raider who lit the fire had vanished into the night. But as the sun rose, a figure appeared on the ridgeline. The same raider, her hands raw and bleeding, dragging a sled of fresh-cut lumber. She didn't speak. She just walked past him, set the first beam, and began to rebuild. And Otto understood that the fire had been a message. But this return was something else entirely. The woman was Grisha, a raider of the Broken Tooth clan. And the barn wasn't just a barn. It was the last piece of a farmer's life that had taken 10 years to build. What Otto didn't know that morning, knee-deep in embers, was that the fire had been delivered under direct orders from a warlord named Varkos, a predator who held Grisha's entire clan as hostages of her obedience. Varkos demanded a message of terror. She delivered one. But Grisha was no mindless soldier. Her return with lumber was not guilt. It was the first move of a woman who had run out of ways to serve and was about to invent a new one. This is not a story about a barn. It is about the moment a single act of defiance turned into the spark that would burn a tyrant's empire to the ground. 3 nights earlier, Grisha had knelt on the stone floor of the Spinehold War Hall, her knees aching, and listened as Warlord Varkos explained that a farmer named Otto was refusing to pay his quarterly tribute. Varkos did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply said, "Send a message. Burn the barn, and do not be seen. If the farmer resists, burn the house." Grisha had looked up, and Varkos had smiled. "Your sister's daughter is learning to read, I'm told. It would be a pity if she lost her eyes." That was the only threat required. Grisha rose, mounted her wolf, and rode south with 3 others, none of them willing to speak what they were all thinking. They reached the farmstead at Moon High. Otto slept in the house. Grisha lit the torch herself. She held it to the dry hay, watched the flames catch, and turned away before she could see the man's face when he woke. The fire consumed a decade of work in an hour. Grisha was gone before the sun rose, just as Varkos had ordered. But she did not go far. She stopped at the creek 3 miles from the farm, dismounted, and spent the rest of the night gouging her own palms against the river rock. The pain kept her from screaming. When Otto first saw the orc woman walking toward him through the morning ash, dragging a sled of fresh-cut lumber, his hand closed on a charred beam. He swung. The beam stopped an inch from her skull, not because he lost his nerve, but because he saw her hands. The palms were shredded, blood painting the raw wood of the sled handles. She said, "I can't undo what I did, but I can rebuild it." Otto let the beam fall. He asked one question. "Why did you come back?" Grisha told him about Varkos, about the 37 members of her clan locked in the Spinehold dungeons, about her niece Kala, 8 years old, who was learning to read while a dozen guards waited for the order to slit her throat. Otto listened, and when she finished, he said, "Varkos took my wife 13 years ago. He burned my first house, too. I rebuilt. He will burn this one again unless we stop him." And that is how, in the shadow of a burned barn, a farmer and an unwilling raider became allies. Over the next 3 days, the barn rose slowly. Grisha hauled timber, her wounded hands wrapped in linen strips that Otto changed every morning. Otto sawed and hammered, his back turned to the road. To any passing eye, it was a farmer and a hired hand mending a loss. But the real work was happening out of sight. Between each nail, they exchanged intelligence. Grisha drew the Spinehold layout in the dirt with a stick. The guard rotation at midnight. the location of the hostage pens in the lower keep, the blind spot behind the eastern armory where a single smoke bomb could disable the garrison response. Otto studied the map, then showed her the entrance behind a collapsed feed trough in his root cellar. The old mining tunnels ran for half a mile beneath the foothills, abandoned since his grandfather's time, and emerged directly beneath the Spinehold's foundation wall. While the barn rose above ground, they began mapping an assault below it. Grisha applied her raiders' knowledge to every beam they set, building hidden compartments into the walls that could conceal short blades and signal whistles. Otto carved their findings into a wooden ox yoke, a farmer's tool that, read correctly, was a tactical key to the fortress. They rehearsed the sequence, finish the barn, wait for the next tribute collection when Varkos's attention would be on the gold, stage a diversionary fire in the eastern storehouse, and during the chaos, move Grisha's clan through the tunnels to freedom. It was a desperate plan, but it was a plan. And for the first time in years, Otto caught himself laughing. But Varkos had eyes everywhere. A grain merchant named Heldrick, who passed the farm twice a week, noted the orc woman's presence and the rising timbers. He sent word. By nightfall on the third day, Varkos sat in his war room, turning a dagger in his hand, and read the report. "She has gone soft," he said. "Burn the barn? Now she builds it. She is no longer a weapon. She is a message." He looked at his captain, Krell, the man who had executed 3 of Grisha's cousins for the crime of looking at him wrong. "Take 6 riders, kill the farmer and the trader. Burn the barn again, with their bodies inside. Let the valley see what happens when you disobey a warlord." Krell nodded. 4 hours later, the riders left the Spinehold. Grisha and Otto had just finished setting the eastern wall. They were laughing for the first time, the sound of 2 people who had finally found a way out. They didn't hear the hoofbeats, not until the 6 shadows appeared on the ridgeline. Grisha heard the hoofbeats first. Her hand went to the axe at her belt, the same axe she had used to split kindling for the barn, and Otto saw her face change into something harder than a farmhand's. "How many?" he said. Grisha didn't answer. She was counting shadows. 6. Krell's silhouette was unmistakable. The left shoulder lower than the right from an old war wound, the helmet crest of a captain. Varkos had sent his best killer. Otto reached into the half-built eastern wall, his fingers finding the seam where he had hidden Grisha's short blade. He pulled it free and handed it to her. "I'll buy you the count of 10, he said. "Go through the root cellar." Grisha took the blade and did not run. She stepped into the open. The 6 riders were already at the gate. Krell dismounted slowly, a man savoring the moment. "The warlord sends his compliments, Grisha. You were told to burn and vanish. Instead, you built. Now we build something too. A pyre." He gestured at the new barn, its fresh pine beams still smelling of sap. "You'll burn inside it with the farmer." Grisha didn't speak. She moved. The blade left her hand in a flat, hard arc, and the rider to Krell's left collapsed, with the hilt protruding from his throat. The remaining 5 reacted with the trained instincts of men who had killed for years. 2 charged Grisha. 1 swung a sword at Otto's head. Otto dropped under the swing, rolled, and came up with a carpenter's hammer driven into the man's knee. The rider screamed and toppled. Grisha caught an incoming axe on her blade, twisted, and used the raider's momentum to drive her own shoulder into his chest, sending him into a stack of lumber. The 3rd rider circled behind her. Otto shouted a warning. Grisha spun and took a cut across her forearm, but her answering blow opened the man's throat. Krell had not moved. He was watching. In less than a minute, 3 of his 6 were dead or crippled. The remaining 2 hesitated. "She fights like that with a barn nail in her palm," Otto said, pulling the hammer from the fallen rider's leg. Krell drew his sword, a 2-handed thing of war steel. "Then she dies with it." He advanced on Grisha, and the real fight began. The other 2 riders, emboldened, rushed Otto. He had no sword. He had a hammer and a piece of splintered pine. He used both, hitting one rider in the face with the board and driving the hammer into the other's sword arm. The arm broke with a sound like snapping greenwood. The rider dropped his weapon, and Otto finished him. The last one fled. Otto didn't chase him. He turned to see Grisha and Krell locked in a killing dance. Krell was bigger, stronger, fresher. But Grisha was fighting for 37 people in a stone cell, and an 8-year-old who loved reading. Krell's sword slashed her shoulder, her thigh. She didn't slow. She caught his blade on her own, deflected it into the barn's door frame, and then her knee drove into his gut. He doubled over. She brought the axe down on the back of his neck. Krell, captain of Varkos's guard, died on the same dirt where Otto's wife had once planted sunflowers. The fight was over. 4 riders dead, 1 crippled, 1 fled. Grisha stood bleeding from 5 wounds, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Otto was holding a broken hammer and a board with blood on it. "He'll send more," Grisha said. "Krell was his favorite. He'll send the whole garrison." Otto dropped the board. "Then we don't wait." He led her to the root cellar, to the trough concealment, and into the old mining tunnels. They moved through the dark with only a single oil lamp Otto had stashed 2 days ago. The tunnel walls were damp, the air thick with the smell of earth and forgotten things. Grisha's injuries slowed her, but she refused to stop. After half a mile, the tunnel opened into a natural chamber directly beneath the Spinehold's lower foundation. Above them, through inches of stone, they could hear the muffled sounds of a fortress at midnight, the changing of the northern guard, the clink of keys, the distant howl of a wolf. Grisha pointed up. "The hostages are directly above us. The lower keep cells are at the north wall. The armory is east. If we can get inside without alerting the watch, we can arm the prisoners and take the garrison from within." Otto studied the stone. "Your plan was to smoke the garrison and move during chaos. We don't have smoke. We don't have chaos." "We have something better," Grisha said. "I know the guard rotation. I know which guards are clan members forced to serve Varkos. I know which of them will turn if they see me free." She touched her chest. "I am Grisha of the Broken Tooth. They know what I carry." Otto looked at her. "What do you carry?" "I carry the debt of a burned barn, and I intend to repay it in full." They waited until the midnight bell. Then Grisha climbed a fallen pillar and pressed against a loose stone in the ceiling. The stone shifted. She pushed, and it fell away, revealing the wooden floor of a storage closet in the lower keep. She pulled herself up, Otto following. The closet was dark, full of old grain sacks. Beyond the door, the corridor was empty. Grisha moved first, her steps silent despite her wounds. She knew this place. She had walked these halls for years before Varkos made her his weapon. At the first guard post, a young orc with a scarred cheek stood watch. He saw Grisha and opened his mouth to shout. She put a hand over it. "Tarek, it's me." The guard's eyes widened. "They said you were dead." "Not yet. Where is Kala?" "In the main pens. They moved her when the riders left." Grisha closed her eyes for one breath. Then she said, Who commands the North Watch tonight? Gren. He's loyal. He's been waiting for a chance. Wake him. Quietly. Tell him to bring the keyring to the lower cells. Tarek nodded and disappeared. 20 minutes later, 23 clan members stood in the lower keep armory, pulling blades from the racks. Grisha's niece Kala held a short sword in both hands, her eyes huge but steady. "I knew you'd come back," she said. "I told them you would." Grisha knelt and touched the girl's face. "You were right. Now I need you to be brave one more time. Stay with the other children in the Keeper's Chapel until it's over." Kala nodded. "I'll read to them. I have a book." Grisha nearly broke then, but she stood, turned to the armed prisoners, and gave the orders. What happened next was not a battle. It was a reckoning. Gren and 3 night guards opened the main gates from within. The prisoners swept through the lower keep, disarming the garrison patrols before they could raise alarms. Otto, who had spent 13 years dreaming of this night, moved with a farmer's brutal efficiency, taking down 2 guards with a shovel handle and a well-aimed grain block. Grisha fought at the head, her axe swinging, her voice rallying the broken tooth. By the time Varkos woke, his fortress was already lost. He heard the shouting, the clash of steel, the silence that followed. He dressed in his war armor and waited. That is where we find ourselves. A warlord sitting alone in his war room, the shouts of freedom outside his door, and a farmer and a raider climbing the stairs to finish a 13-year-old debt. But Varkos, even cornered, is not a man who surrenders. He has one final card to play. On the table before him is a document signed by the allied clans, granting him immunity if he delivers the Broken Tooth leaders. He intends to offer that immunity to Grisha and Otto in exchange for their own lives. And he believes, even now, that a warlord's deal is worth more than a farmer's revenge. Varkos sat alone in his war room, the parchment spread before him, the wax seal of the allied clans catching the light of a single candle. The immunity agreement was genuine. It had been drafted by the clan elders 3 months prior, buried in a stack of trade documents, a contingency that Varkos had insisted on when he first agreed to govern the Spinehold as their proxy. He had always known the day might come when his methods grew too brutal, when the cries of his prisoners reached ears beyond the valley. So he had built an exit. The document promised full protection, a retirement in the outer territories, and the destruction of all records of his crimes. All he had to do was deliver the leaders of the Broken Tooth Rebellion into the hands of the Allied Council, Grisha, Otto, and every freed prisoner who had raised a weapon tonight. He intended to offer them that deal, but he had also prepared a second option. The war room had a hidden hatch beneath the animal skin rug, a tunnel that led directly to the eastern stable. In the stable, 12 war wolves waited with fresh supplies, enough to carry him and 5 loyal men beyond the reach of any militia. He had not become warlord by trusting parchment. He would give the rebels one chance to accept his mercy. If they refused, he would vanish, and the allied clans would descend on the Spinehold with a full legion. He had already sent the signal. A rider had departed through the southern pass the moment Krell's party failed to report. The legion would arrive by dawn. All Varkos had to do was keep Grisha and Otto talking until the trap closed around them. The door to the war room swung open. Grisha entered first, her axe dripping with the blood of the last garrison sergeant. Otto followed, his farmer's clothes soaked red, his right hand clutching a short sword he had taken from the armory. Grisha's wounds were still seeping, but she moved with the coiled tension of a woman who had not yet finished. Varkos. Her voice carried the same flat weight it had carried when she knelt on this same floor and heard him threaten an 8-year-old's eyes. "The fortress is ours. Your garrison is dead. The prisoners are free." Varkos did not rise. He steepled his fingers and smiled. "You've done well, Grisha. I always said you were my best. It's why I sent you to burn the barn, not to collect tribute. I needed you at that farm. I needed you to break." Grisha's axe shifted in her grip. "What are you talking about?" Varkos leaned forward. "The farmer's barn was never the target. You were. I knew you'd refuse the order, eventually. I knew you'd find some excuse to return, to help him rebuild. It was a test of your disobedience. I wanted you to fail." Otto stepped forward. "Why would you want your own raider to betray you?" Varkos laughed, a dry sound like stones grinding. "Because I needed a rebellion. The Allied clans have been pressing me for years to hand over the Spinehold to a civilian governor. They wanted me deposed, but they lacked justification. A rebellion, led by my own warrior, slaughtering my garrison, freeing prisoners I'd held illegally, would force their hand. They would have to send a legion to restore order. And in that chaos, I would escape with the immunity agreement already signed, while the Allied clans crushed the rebellion they had secretly funded. You are not the spark that burns my empire. You are the kindling I placed in the fire myself." The room went cold. Grisha felt the wound in her shoulder throb, but it was nothing to the realization settling into her bones. The barn burning, the hostages, the captain's execution, the entire night of bloodshed, it was all a piece of Varkos's design. He had manipulated her from the start, from the moment he first mentioned her niece. He had known she would break. He had counted on it. Otto looked at the parchment on the table. The immunity seal was authentic. He had seen similar documents when the Allied tax collectors visited the valley. This was not a bluff. Varkos had a legal exit, and he had lured them into a trap that would destroy every freed prisoner. Worse, the Legion was already on the march. But Otto noticed something else. Varkos was still sitting. A warlord who had an escape hatch did not sit and wait to be killed. He was stalling. Otto caught Grisha's eye and made a small gesture toward the southern window. Through the glass, faint torchlight was moving on the distant pass. The Legion was closer than even Varkos knew. Otto calculated the time. They had perhaps an hour before the first scouts reached the outer gate. Grisha did not lower her axe. She stepped closer to the table, close enough that Varkos had to look up to meet her gaze. "You think you've won. You think you've played every piece. But you forgot one thing." Varkos raised an eyebrow. "What is that?" "You sent me to burn a barn. I came back to rebuild it. And while I rebuilt it, I learned things. Not just from the farmer. I learned the layout of this fortress from a man who has hated you for 13 years and mapped every stone. I learned the names of every guard who would turn against you from my own people. I learned that you've been skimming from the Allied tribute for years, falsifying reports to hide your own wealth. And I learned something else. The farmer's barn wasn't just a barn. It was the key to a tunnel system that runs beneath this entire valley. A tunnel system that emerges not just here, but also in the Allied Council Lodge in Thornville. Varkos went still. "That's impossible." Otto spoke now, his voice level. "My grandfather was a surveyor for the original mining charters. He mapped every tunnel, every ventilation shaft. I found his maps in the root cellar when I was 12. I never showed them to anyone because no one ever asked. But when Grisha started rebuilding the barn, we realized the eastern wall sat directly over a shaft that connects to the Thornville Lodge basement. We sent a runner through it an hour ago. A girl named Calla, carrying a book and a message. Grisha's niece. Varkos's face drained. The immunity deal required that no evidence of his crimes reach the council before the Legion's report. If an 8-year-old girl delivered documentation of the Spinehold's illegal hostages and the false tribute records directly to the Elder's chambers, the immunity parchment was worthless. Worse, the Legion's orders to crush a rebellion would be countermanded by the council itself. He would be arrested by the very soldiers sent to save him. Varkos stood, his chair scraping the stone. "You're lying." "I'm a farmer," Otto said. "I don't lie. I just plant things and wait." Grisha stepped aside, giving him a clear path to the door. "Go ahead, run. The tunnel in the stable is still open, but the Legion won't reach you before Calla reaches the lodge. You're out of time, Varkos. Your deal is dead. Your escape is dead. Your empire was dead the moment you made a raider carry lumber with bleeding hands." Varkos lunged for the hatch. Grisha let him. She waited until he had the rug pulled back and the iron ring in his hand. Then she said, "One more thing. The runner we sent wasn't just a child. She carried the maps. The same maps we used to navigate the tunnels. The maps that show every exit, every entrance, every secret passage in this fortress. By the time the Legion arrives, the Council will have distributed copies to every clan elder. Your hidden ways will be public. Your fortress will be a prison of glass. And every warlord who thought they could hide behind carved stone and paid-off guards will know that there's no such thing as a safe room anymore." Varkos froze. The implication was vast. The tunnel maps weren't just about this fortress. They compromised dozens of strongholds that had been built on the same mining grid. The entire power structure of the warlords relied on secrecy and inaccessibility. A child with a book was about to unravel centuries of military architecture. Otto had not given her just any book. He had given her the surveyor's original charts, a document so complete that a single reading would render every warlord's hidden exits a liability. This was not a rebellion. This was an empire reset. Varkos turned back, his composure shattered. "You've doomed us all. The clans will tear each other apart. The chaos will consume every territory." "No," Grisha said. "It will consume the ones who built their power on threats and burned barns. The rest of us will rebuild." She raised her axe. "But you won't see it." The strike was clean. Varkos died as the first horns of the Legion sounded from the southern ridge. His body fell across the immunity parchment, soaking it in warlord's blood. Otto pulled Grisha away from the window. "We have to meet the Legion at the gate. We have to make sure they see freed prisoners, not rebels. We have to be standing with the barn's blueprints, not the bones of a dead tyrant." Grisha nodded. They left the war room together, down the stairs, through the courtyard where the Broken Tooth were already gathering, their children holding hands, their elders carrying whatever belongings they could salvage. Calla's absence was a sharp hope in the cold air. They had sent her into the dark with a desperate plan. Now they had to buy her time. At the outer gate, Grisha and Otto stood shoulder to shoulder, a raider and a farmer, facing the approaching Legion. The first captain, a gray-haired orc named Rennick, reined his wolf and surveyed the scene. The Spinehold's banner was down, replaced by a torn farm cloth. His eyes met Grisha's. "We received word of an uprising." "You received word from a warlord," Grisha said. "I will tell you the truth from a freed people. Varkos is dead. His prisoners are free. And a child is on her way to the council lodge with evidence of his crimes and maps that will change the shape of this territory forever. There is no rebellion to crush. There is only a valley that needs to rebuild. Rennick looked at the cloth banner, at Otto's blood-stained tunic, at Grisha's wounded arms. He was a soldier who had followed many orders he didn't agree with. He saw what was in front of him. He dismounted. This is the pivot, the moment where the Legion's arrival could become rescue or massacre. And it all depends on whether an 8-year-old with a book made it through the dark. Rennick dismounted, and the weight of that decision settled over the courtyard. A Legion captain does not dismount unless he intends to talk rather than fight. The soldiers behind him, 40 wolves with armored riders, watched their commander walk toward a blood-soaked farmer and a wounded orc woman carrying an axe. Rennick stopped a sword's length away. "Where is the child?" he asked. "Still in the tunnels," Otto said. "She's carrying proof of everything that happened here. Give her time to reach the lodge." Rennick studied Otto's face, the deep lines, the eyes of a man who had already buried one wife and rebuilt one barn and had no more patience for tyrants. Then he turned to his second-in-command. "Hold the line. No one enters the fortress until I give the order." The soldiers obeyed, confusion flickering across their faces, but the discipline held. The Legion had been sent to crush a rebellion. Instead, they found a farm cloth hanging from a captured stronghold. In the spine of the mountain, Calla moved through the dark with the surveyor maps clutched to her chest. She had a candle stub that Tarek had given her, the flame trembling with each step. The tunnel was narrow, and the air was cold, but the 8-year-old did not stop. She had told her aunt she would read to the other children. She had a book. She had not lied. The book was a bound folio of her grandfather's survey charts, and she had spent the journey memorizing the symbols because she wanted to understand them when she handed them over. She climbed a ventilation ladder one-handed, the iron rungs slick with condensation, and emerged through a floor grate into the Thornville Lodge basement. The council would not convene for another 2 hours. Calla found the head elder's private chamber. She knocked. The old woman who opened the door saw a child covered in tunnel grit, holding a folio. "Please," Calla said, "my aunt said you need to read this before the Legion kills everyone." The elder, a gray-haired orc named Selva, who had served the council for 40 years, took the folio and began to read. By the time she finished the first page, she was already drafting a countermand. Back at the Spinehold, Rennick received the message by courier bird. The council had seen Varkos's tribute fraud, the hostage records, the maps. The Legion was ordered to stand down and provide aid to the freed prisoners. The immunity agreement Varkos had signed was nullified, his assets seized, his crimes documented. The rebellion was not a rebellion. It was a liberation with evidence. Rennick read the order aloud, and the soldiers relaxed. Not all of them. Some had profited under Varkos's regime, but they were smart enough to see the writing on the stone. The war was over. It had never really started. Grisha watched the courier fly back toward Thornville. She swayed, and Otto caught her. "You need a medic," he said. "The barn's not done," she replied. It was the first thing she had said that sounded like the woman who had dragged a sled of lumber with raw palms. Otto half-carried her to the infirmary, a room the prisoners had already stocked with supplies from the garrison. The healers, 2 clan women who had been held as cooks, cleaned and stitched her 5 wounds. They said she would carry scars, but she would keep the arm. Grisha asked about the barn while they worked. "The eastern wall is up. The roof needs trusses. We lost a day." The healers exchanged a look. Patients who talked through stitching were either delirious or entirely too stubborn to die. Grisha was the second kind. 3 days later, the barn was finished. The Legion stayed as peacekeepers, but Otto made it clear they were to camp outside the fence line. "You're guests," he said, "not occupiers, and guests help with the hay." So 40 soldiers found themselves hauling baled rye alongside the broken-toothed children. Kala, who had become something of a legend among the council staff, returned with a letter of formal thanks and a new book, a dictionary of legal terms she had requested. She was still reading to the other children, but now the books were about clan law. Grisha watched her from the barn doorway and felt the knot in her chest loosen for the first time in years. The day the roof went on, Otto climbed to the peak and nailed a carved wooden board across the ridge beam. It was the board from his wife's first garden bed, salvaged from the fire, with her name burned into the grain. He had kept it hidden in the root cellar, a thing too precious to lose. Grisha held the ladder. When Otto came down, he said, "She would have liked you." Grisha didn't answer. She didn't need to. She touched the board once, lightly, and then turned to the lumber stack. There was still the fence to mend. The Allied Council sent a representative, Elder Selva herself, to assess the situation. She walked the fortress, interviewed the prisoners, read Varkos's ledgers. What she found was worse than even Kala's maps suggested. Varkos had been embezzling from the clan treasury for over a decade, funneling gold into hidden accounts in the outer territories. He had intentionally provoked border conflicts to justify his garrison taxes, then pocketed the surplus. The hostages were not just leverage. They were a workforce he lent to mining operations that paid him directly. The council had been complicit in its ignorance, accepting his reports without audit. Selva summoned a full inquiry, and the ripple effects began dismantling 4 other warlords within the month. The maps Kala delivered did exactly what Grisha promised. They exposed hidden passages in 8 strongholds, forcing each to open its doors to independent inspection. The age of the warlord was ending, not with a war, but with a child and a survey. But the most important change happened in the valley. The freed prisoners, now numbering over 40, including children and elders, had nowhere to return to. Their clan lands had been absorbed by Varkos's allies, so Otto offered them the farm. Not the house, the whole valley. His grandfather's survey included land rights that extended 3 miles in every direction, a forgotten detail that Selva's inspection confirmed. The Broken Tooth began building. Cabins rose alongside the barn, a smokehouse, a school. Grisha, once a raider who burned things, became the woman who laid out the irrigation channels and argued with the carpenter about roof pitches. Otto, who had spent 13 years alone with a ghost and a hammer, found himself eating dinner with 40 people who called him Uncle. This was not a fairy tale. The first winter was hard. The stored grain from Varkos's vaults ran low. A late frost killed the early crop. Grisha and Otto spent nights at the old council table in the farmhouse, now a village hall, working through supply calculations. But the difference was this. The problems were ordinary. Freeze lines and seedling counts, not hostage lists and execution orders. When Kala caught a fever in the 3rd month, the entire village mobilized. She recovered, and the day she stood up, she asked Otto to teach her surveying. He started that afternoon. By spring, she could measure a plot line with a rope and a level. By summer, she was teaching the other children. The barn that had been built from ash became the center of a settlement, and the settlement had a name now, Ash Hearth. The children painted a sign. 1 year after the fire, on the morning of the first harvest, Grisha walked to the ridge where she had stopped at dawn with bleeding hands. Otto was already there, looking out at the valley. The morning sun caught the rooftops, the green fields, the fence lines that no longer lost their argument with gravity. "I almost didn't come back," Grisha said. "I stood right here. I thought about running, taking Kala and her mother, and just vanishing. No barn, no rebellion. Just gone." Otto nodded. "Why didn't you?" Grisha looked at her palms, the scars now pale and flat. "Because the fire was still burning, and I'd never finished anything I started." Otto laughed, the same rough sound she had heard that first day, when he realized they were both too stubborn to quit. "You finished this." "We did," she said, and she was, as it turned out, correct. The legacy that grew from that burned barn would reshape the territory. Within 5 years, the tunnel maps had become public record. The warlord system had collapsed into a council of elected governors, and Ash Hearth had trained 17 surveyors, 8 of them former hostages. Kala, at 13, became the youngest person ever to testify before the Allied Council, using the legal dictionary she had carried through the dark. Otto married again, not to replace his first wife, but to build something new beside someone who understood the cost of rebuilding. Grisha became the first broken-tooth elder to sit on the Valley Council. And every year, on the anniversary of the fire, they would gather at the barn, touch the carved board with the name of Otto's first wife, and tell the story. Not the story of the warlord's fall, though that was told too. The story of the morning a raider came back, the story of a farmer who swung a beam and stopped it an inch from her skull because he saw her hands. The story of a barn that burned for coin and rose for something far more valuable. It is the story we are still telling now. The telling matters because the world Grisha and Otto reshaped did not end with one warlord's death. The maps Kala carried through the dark didn't just expose hidden passages. They exposed a truth that had been buried for generations, that power built on fear is always one act of courage away from collapse. In the decades that followed, the surveyor's folio became a template for accountability. Strongholds that had been impenetrable fortresses became transparent institutions. The children who learned surveying in Otto's Valley would go on to chart new borders, not with swords, but with rope lines and legal deeds. The barn itself, rebuilt from ash, stood for 87 years before a lightning strike claimed it. By then, Ash Hearth had grown into a town of 3,000, and the anniversary gathering had become a regional holiday. The carved board with the name of Otto's first wife was moved to the town hall, where newly elected council members still touched it before taking their oaths. Grisha lived to see her great-grandchildren train as legal advocates. Otto, ever the farmer, died peacefully in his sleep on the same day the eastern field was planted with a new strain of blight-resistant rye. His last words were, "Tell Grisha the rows are straight." She already knew. She had checked them that morning. The question that lingers, the one the storytellers debate every year on the anniversary, is not about the grand strategy or the hidden maps. It is a smaller, sharper question. What would have happened if Grisha had kept riding? She stood on that ridge, hands bleeding, and nearly chose the wilderness over the barn. Otto stood in the ash, a charred beam in his grip, and nearly chose vengeance over listening. Both of them, in the space of a single breath, could have let the story end in fire and silence. They didn't, and because they didn't, a warlord's empire crumbled, a valley bloomed, and a child with a book grew up to help rewrite the laws of an entire territory. The biggest revolutions do not always begin with armies. Sometimes they begin with a sled of fresh lumber and a farmer who stops to look at someone's hands. If this story has stayed with you, if you've ever rebuilt something that was burned, or held back a blow long enough to listen, then we built this for you. Hit subscribe to join us for more tales of unlikely alliances and world-shifting choices. Leave a like, drop a comment telling us what you would have done on that ridge, and share this with someone who needs to hear that rebuilding is possible. We'll be back with another chronicle from the hidden corners of the continent. Until then, keep building, keep listening, and keep your hands open.